The first time I caught her, she was in a neon pink pool float, sipping from a wine tumbler like she owned the place. My name's Landon Baker. I'm a 38-year-old ER nurse who bought a quiet house in a small Florida neighborhood last year. It came with a private backyard pool, gated, fenced, locked, or so I thought. "Excuse me," I shouted from the back door. "What are you doing in my pool?" She blinked at me over her sunglasses like I was the intruder. "Oh, don't be dramatic, Landon," she said, waving one hand. "The HOA has an easement clause. It's not technically private." That was Barbara Jennings, mid-50s, shoulder-length bleach blonde hair, always in a sun hat too big for her ego. She was the HOA president, and she wielded that title like a hammer. I'd had run-ins with her before, mostly about unapproved trash can placement or grass length. But this was something else. "There is no easement for my backyard," I said, walking toward the gate. "This is private property." That gate was locked. "Oh, well, it was," she said casually, reaching down to toss a rubber duck toward the deep end. "But I have the master HOA keys. I had a copy made for emergency inspections." I stared at the lock, scratched up and clearly forced. I clenched my jaw. "You broke in." She didn't deny it. "And if you have a problem," she added, slipping her sunglasses back on, "you can bring it up at the next HOA meeting. Good luck getting anything passed without my vote." Then she paddled away like we were in some kind of resort she managed. I didn't sleep that night, not because of fear, because of fury. She'd violated my privacy, broken the law, and acted like it was her right. I checked the bylaws she kept referencing. No mention of shared pool access. No easement clause. Just a whole lot of nonsense she used to intimidate anyone who dared challenge her. The next day, I installed a new heavy-duty padlock and a motion-activated camera facing the gate. 2 days later, she was back, this time in a leopard print one-piece and dragging a cooler behind her. The camera caught her using bolt cutters to snap the new lock. Then she waved at the lens. I filed a police report. The officer looked sympathetic, but said it was a civil matter unless I had proof of damages or threats. That night, I sat at my laptop with the footage playing on loop, my blood boiling. She thought she had the upper hand because of her HOA title. She had no idea who she was messing with. So I put a plan into motion. Not just to stop her, but to expose everything she'd been doing to the rest of the neighborhood. And I wasn't going to stop until she was out of that pool and out of power. I waited until Saturday morning to make my next move. Not because I wanted to give Barbara another opportunity. She'd already helped herself to my pool twice that week. But because I needed time to dig. And by dig, I mean I spent all of Thursday and Friday combing through public records, county zoning ordinances, and every HOA filing available through the clerk's online database. My background in emergency medicine didn't give me legal training, but it did teach me how to spot patterns, connect dots, and stay patient under pressure. And patterns. Barbara Jennings left them everywhere. Her name was on every HOA board vote for the last 7 years. Not just present, but decisive. Every project, every budget shift, every citation protocol revision, if she didn't initiate it, she buried it. She'd been re-elected unopposed 4 times, and the last time anyone ran against her, they abruptly withdrew after a sudden wave of property violations appeared on their record. I flagged that name, George McCullen, and looked him up. His house had gone into foreclosure 6 months after Barbara's campaign blitz. I kept digging. By the time I showed up at my neighbor Celeste's door, I had a manila folder in hand and a very specific request. "I know this is weird," I said, after she invited me in and handed me a coffee mug shaped like a dachshund. "But I think Barbara's been abusing her position for years. I need help proving it." Celeste wasn't just the neighborhood's resident candle maker. She was also a recently retired court clerk. She read the documents in silence for 10 straight minutes. Then she looked up at me. "Where did you get all this?" she asked. "Public record." She leaned back in her chair, eyes narrowing with interest. Then she jabbed a finger at the corner of one page. This is a conflict of interest. She approved a landscaping contract twice for a company her nephew owns. That's a direct violation of the HOA's own conflict policy. I nodded. And the company doesn't even have an active business license anymore. Celeste raised an eyebrow. You planning to go to the board with this, or do you want this done right? Right. She stood, walked to a drawer, and pulled out a dusty binder with red tabs sticking out the sides. Then we start with a petition for a special audit. That's how it began. Not with confrontation, but with paperwork and strategy. Celeste helped me draft the petition. We didn't just accuse, we cited. Every line of our document referenced a specific policy or Florida statute. We weren't shouting into the void. We were building a foundation. By the end of the weekend, we had 22 signatures. That was enough to trigger a mandatory special board meeting under the HOA's own charter. We submitted it by certified mail on Monday morning. Barbara must have gotten the notice by Tuesday, because that evening the gate camera picked her up again. Only this time, she wasn't in a swimsuit. She wore gloves, carried a crowbar, and had a roll of black plastic tucked under her arm. I watched, stunned, as she pried the camera loose from its mount, yanked the wiring from the wall, and stuffed the entire unit into the bag. Then she looked straight at the lens before it cut out. I called the police at once. When Officer Morales arrived, I handed him the backup SD card. I'd installed a second internal storage unit on a hunch. He watched the footage twice, then looked at me with the kind of expression ER doctors give when they know what's wrong but can't say it yet. I'm going to file this as felony vandalism and trespassing, he said. And I'll be forwarding this to the state attorney's office. You've got very clear evidence here. Can she be arrested? She will be, but it'll take a few days. She's not a flight risk, and we have to follow due process. It wasn't the immediate justice I wanted, but it was a start. That night, I replaced the camera with a newer model, smaller, better hidden, and equipped with cloud upload. I wasn't just protecting myself anymore. I was documenting everything. Wednesday came, and with it, retaliation. I found a violation notice taped to my front door. It claimed I'd violated aesthetic integrity standards by painting my trim without approval. My trim was the same color it had been when I bought the house. Then came the second notice alleging unapproved surveillance equipment. A third followed, citing unauthorized gatherings, which I assumed referred to the 3 neighbors who visited to sign the petition. Each notice mentioned a fine of $100. None were enforceable without board approval, which at that point she didn't have. But Barbara was trying to intimidate me. Celeste wasn't having it. She typed up a cease and desist letter citing Florida HOA statutes, including the clause that rendered any retaliatory actions taken after a petition null and void. We sent that off too, certified. The special board meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday. In the meantime, I kept quiet, let her bluff, and continued collecting. But Barbara didn't. Friday morning, I woke up to discover my backyard gate had been ripped clean off the hinges. The pool was filled with debris, leaves, trash, a bag of mulch floating near the deep end. That crossed a line. Officer Morales returned with a warrant in hand. They arrested her that afternoon. The charge was expanded to include destruction of private property and evidence. Tampering the crowbar she used to pry the camera had been found in her garage with fresh paint chipping. Watching her being led away in handcuffs was satisfying in a way I didn't expect. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was quiet, final, earned. But the story didn't end there. At the special meeting, Celeste and I laid out everything: the contracts with her nephew, the manipulated voting records, the fines issued without quorum, the misuse of HOA keys to access private property. We even had sworn statements from 2 other residents who'd caught her snooping in their yards using the same inspection excuse. The board was silent at first. Then one member, a quiet man named Reggie who'd served under her for years, stood up and said, "I move to remove Barbara Jennings from her position as HOA president, effective immediately." The vote was unanimous. I didn't celebrate. I just went home, drained the pool, and hired a contractor to install a 10-foot privacy wall with anti-climb panels. 3 weeks later, the HOA board sent out a letter to all residents, announcing new oversight policies and an open call for volunteers to join the ethics committee. Barbara's house went up for sale not long after. I never saw her again, but I kept the footage. Not out of spite, out of principle. Because people like her thrive on fear, silence, and assumption. And the only way to beat that is with evidence, patience, and a whole lot of people willing to say, no more. The new board wasted no time. Within a week of Barbara's removal, the acting president Reggie, who turned out to be a retired high school principal, called for a full forensic audit of the HOA's finances. He asked if I would join the oversight committee. I declined. I told him I'd done my part, and now it was time for them to do theirs. Honestly, I just wanted a quiet swim without worrying who might be floating in my deep end. But peace didn't come immediately. A week after Barbara's arrest, I got a letter, not from the HOA, from a private law firm. It was a cease and desist order claiming I had slandered Barbara's name and reputation and contributed to unlawful harassment. It was signed by an attorney named Craig Lormer, who, according to a quick database search, had an active disciplinary proceeding on record for filing frivolous lawsuits. I brought the letter to Celeste. "You're kidding me," she said, scanning the document. "This isn't even addressed properly. It uses your email as your legal name, and look at this formatting. This guy's trying to bluff you into backing off." "I figured," I said, sipping iced tea from a mason jar. "Should I ignore it, send it to the state bar, and let Reggie know?" I did both. 2 days later, I got a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't pick up, but curiosity got the better of me. Landon Baker. The voice was clipped, professional. "This is Detective Andrea Hastings with the County Financial Crimes Unit. I'd like to ask you a few questions about recent HOA activities in your neighborhood." Apparently, the audit had revealed more than the board anticipated. As it turned out, Barbara hadn't just funneled contracts to her nephew. She had been writing reimbursement checks to herself under different names. One was B. Jensen Consulting. Another was Suncoast Admin Services. Both were registered to a P.O. box in a neighboring town. Over the past 3 years, she'd siphoned more than $38,000 from the HOA's operating budget. Enough to cover several community upgrades that never happened. Detective Hastings asked to meet in person. I agreed. We met at the small conference room in the sheriff's annex. Hastings was direct, no nonsense, and carried a leather satchel that looked like it had been through 2 decades of courtroom battles. "I've reviewed the footage you submitted," she said, laying out a folder. "Your documentation is thorough." But what really kicked this open was the contract duplication. "We're preparing to file charges for embezzlement and fraud." I leaned back. "She's still out on bond, right?" "Yes, but not for long. The state attorney's office is planning to consolidate the charges. Once we issue the financial fraud warrant, her bail's void." I nodded slowly. "Anything else you need from me? We might call you as a witness if this goes to trial. But for now, stay alert. If she contacts you again, let us know immediately." I left the station with a strange clarity. I'd started this to stop one woman from swimming in my pool. Now it was a criminal investigation involving felony charges and a probable prison sentence. I thought that would be the end of it, but I underestimated just how deep Barbara's influence had gone. The next morning, I found tire tracks leading across my front lawn. Someone had driven straight through the grass and spun out in the flower bed. No note, no explanation, just shredded turf and broken irrigation lines. I checked the footage. A black SUV with tinted plates, no identifiable tags. I reported it. Officer Morales took the statement. "Looks like intimidation," he said. "If she's desperate, she might be trying to scare you off. She's got a court date. What else could she possibly gain?" He gave a short sigh. Desperation doesn't always follow logic. That night, I installed 2 more cameras, one facing the street, another angled toward the side yard. I also moved my car into the garage and reinforced the side gate with a steel latch, but things didn't escalate the way I expected. Instead, the pressure shifted to the board. The following week, Reggie's mailbox was torn off and filled with concrete. Another board member, Maria, found a dead cat on her porch, not hers, and not from the neighborhood. A third received a letter postmarked from out of state, containing only a single sentence typed in all caps. "Liars burn." Reggie contacted the sheriff's office. They launched a formal investigation into harassment and threats against HOA officials. Detective Hastings looped it into the larger case. "It's not just about the money anymore," she told me over the phone. "She's trying to corrupt the process she used to control." That week, the audit report came back. It was worse than anyone expected. Barbara had not only funneled money to herself, she'd also manipulated fee structures. Several homeowners had been overcharged on their annual dues by as much as 20%. The extra amounts were rerouted through a reserve maintenance fund that never existed. Some of those funds were traced to a local casino. Surveillance footage showed Barbara cashing out chips. Celeste reviewed the audit herself. "That's not HOA mismanagement," she said. "That's wire fraud and racketeering." Detective Hastings agreed. She updated the charges. The day of Barbara's second arrest, I stood on my driveway and watched the unmarked sedan pull up. It was early morning, cool for Florida. No drama, no cuffs in the street. Just two plainclothes officers knocking on her door and a quiet ride downtown. 3 charges: embezzlement, wire fraud, and obstruction. Her bail was denied this time. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood changed. The new board held open meetings at the community center. Minutes were published online. Budget allocations were voted on transparently. The overcharged dues were refunded. The landscaping Barbara had promised for years finally happened, and residents began showing up to meetings. People who had never spoken a word before now voicing concerns, offering ideas and volunteering. I kept to myself, mostly. I showed up to one meeting just to see it in action. Reggie thanked me. Maria brought brownies. A teenager who lived 2 houses down stood up and said, "I didn't know adults could fix stuff like this." Outside, the pool was quiet. My fence stood taller than before, and the cameras blinked silently in the corners. I swam laps after work without checking over my shoulder. One evening, I found an envelope on my doorstep. No name, just a courthouse seal. Inside was a subpoena. Barbara's trial was set for the following month. I was listed as a witness. I called Hastings. "She's pleading not guilty," she said. "But we've got enough to secure a conviction. Your testimony will help seal the timeline." I asked, "Is she acting alone?" Hastings paused. "We're still investigating. There's evidence someone else processed the fake invoices, possibly a former board member. If we can confirm that, there'll be additional indictments." The trial date approached. I met with the prosecutor, reviewed my statement, and sat through witness prep. I answered every question carefully, sticking to facts. No emotion, no speculation, just what I saw, what I recorded, what I filed. The day I took the stand, the courtroom was half full. A few neighbors were there. Reggie, Celeste. Even the teenager from 2 houses down, now in a pressed shirt and tie. Barbara sat at the defense table, expression unreadable. Her once perfect hair was pulled back and the sun hat was long gone. I testified for 22 minutes. When it was over, the defense attorney declined to cross-examine. 3 days later, the verdict came in: guilty on all counts. Barbara Jennings was sentenced to 6 years in state prison, with an additional 5 years of probation and a lifetime ban from serving on any registered board or association in the state of Florida. The neighborhood didn't celebrate. There were no banners, no announcements, but lawns looked nicer. Kids played on the sidewalks. People waved more. One afternoon, I found a note in my mailbox, handwritten, no signature. "Thanks for standing up when the rest of us were too tired to try." I kept it, because that's the thing about these neighborhoods: the rules aren't the problem. It's the people who twist them. But when someone pushes back, not with noise but with proof and patience, the whole thing starts to shift. And sometimes, that's all it takes to drain the pool. The courthouse was quieter than I expected the day Barbara was sentenced. Most of the neighborhood didn't show. A few familiar faces sat along the back row, but this wasn't a spectacle for them anymore. It was cleanup. After everything, there was nothing left for her to manipulate, no board to strong-arm, no residents to intimidate. Just a bench, a judge, and a long list of charges. I didn't stay for the sentencing itself. The prosecutor told me what I needed to know, and I'd said my piece on the stand. What I hadn't expected was what came a week later. A letter from the county clerk's office informing me that Barbara had filed an appeal. Not against her conviction, but against the HOA's restructuring. She was trying to argue that her removal had been unlawful, citing procedural inconsistencies and improper quorum handling. I took the letter straight to Reggie. "She's not trying to win," I said. "She's trying to drag this out. Keep her fingerprints on the system." He nodded, flipping through the notice. "She's banking on us being too tired to respond, or too disorganized. She knows if this goes to court again and we miss a filing deadline, she gets a foot in the door." Celeste joined us on Reggie's porch, carrying a thin stack of documents wrapped in a blue ribbon. She's using a loophole in the community charter, one that hasn't been updated in 15 years. Technically, she's within her rights to challenge the restructuring process, but only if she can prove she wasn't properly notified. "She was arrested," I said. "Isn't that proof enough?" "Not in civil court," Celeste said, "but there's something else." "I pulled the original charter," she added, untying the ribbon. "It's based on a model from 1996. Guess what it doesn't account for?" Reggie leaned forward. "What?" "Electronic correspondence. If we emailed her the removal notice and never sent a certified letter, she can argue she was never formally informed." I rubbed my face. "So she could get the whole board re-evaluated on a technicality." Celeste nodded. "Unless we prove that she received notice in another way, like, say, her signature on the certified receipt." "I have it," Reggie said, standing up suddenly. "She signed for it. I kept the stub." We filed the counterclaim the next day. Celeste walked it into the courthouse herself. She didn't trust electronic filing for this one, and I didn't blame her. Barbara was slippery, always had been. We weren't going to give her a single inch. But the pushback didn't come through the courts, not immediately. 3 days after we filed, a man showed up at my door. He wore a utility vest and carried a clipboard with the seal of the local water authority. Said he was there to inspect a suspected leak. I narrowed my eyes. "You got a work order?" He flipped through his clipboard. "Routine inspection. We received a complaint that your pool's filtration system was leaking into the neighbor's yard." "Nobody lives behind me," I said. He hesitated. "Still have to check it out." I called the water authority while he waited. No inspection had been ordered, no complaints filed. I stepped back. "You can leave now." He shrugged and walked off with too much ease for someone caught in a lie. I memorized the plates on his truck and called Detective Hastings. "I think Barbara's using a proxy," I said. "Somebody showed up pretending to be with public utilities." "We're already looking into associates," she replied. We found a burner phone in her house that had several outgoing calls to a number registered under the name Clay Doyle. That's an alias used by her nephew, same one who ran the fake landscaping company. "So she's still trying to interfere from jail." "She's not going to get far," Hastings said. "We're submitting a request to revoke her communicative privileges." The next day, someone spray-painted my sidewalk, not profanity, just a single word: thief. I pressure-washed it before going into my shift, but the message was clear. She was still trying to rewrite the story. Still trying to paint herself as the victim. Then came the break. Celeste called me just after sunset. "You need to come over, right now." I walked to her porch where she had her laptop open and a small black thumb drive plugged into the side. "This was left in my mailbox," she said. "No note. Just this." She clicked open the folder. Dozens of scanned documents appeared, each labeled by date. They were internal emails messages between Barbara and two former board members. One was a name I recognized, Ellen Hargrove. She'd resigned suddenly a year ago, claiming health issues. The other was unfamiliar, a man named David Linney. The emails discussed monthly reimbursements, fake contractor approvals, and something called Project Quiet Step. "What's Quiet Step?" I asked. Celeste clicked on the attachment. It was a scanned copy of a proposal filed under the HOA's general fund, approving the installation of backlot noise monitoring equipment. Barbara was planning to install directional mics behind certain homes, Celeste said. She claimed it was for after-hours noise violations. But look at the locations. She pointed to the list. 3 of the addresses belonged to residents who had openly criticized her at meetings. One of them was mine. She was spying on us, I said quietly, and billing it to the HOA. We turned everything over to Detective Hastings. 2 days later, a judge issued a warrant for Ellen Hargrove's arrest. Linney had already left the state, but a federal subpoena was filed. The burner phone records showed he'd been helping Barbara coordinate the harassment. The final nail came from a bank statement that Hastings' team had dug up. Barbara had paid a private security firm illegally contracted through the HOA to conduct routine perimeter checks. The checks coincided with dates of reported trespassing incidents, all falsely filed against residents who'd spoken out against her. The charges were enough to warrant a second indictment. By the time the dust settled, 6 people were under investigation. 2 had already agreed to testify in exchange for lesser charges. The judge denied Barbara's appeal outright, citing abuse of process and active interference with an ongoing investigation. The HOA held a final emergency meeting. We voted to dissolve the original charter and draft a new one from scratch. The vote passed unanimously. Reggie stepped down after that. He said he'd done what he came to do. Maria took over as interim president, but her first order of business was establishing term limits and mandatory transparency audits. I kept my distance. I'd never wanted to be part of the board. I just wanted to swim in peace. Summer came, and with it, a sense of normalcy. Kids rode bikes through the cul-de-sac without looking over their shoulders. Residents waved again, not out of obligation, but because it felt earned. One afternoon, I found a package on my porch. No name. Inside was a single item, a laminated sign that read, "Private pool, trespassers will be prosecuted." Below it, someone had added a handwritten note, "We've got your back now, thanks for having ours." I mounted the sign on my new gate. This one wasn't just reinforced, it was custom-forged steel with a recessed lock and an internal alarm trigger. I'd learned my lesson. Barbara's sentencing wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning of everyone else realizing they didn't have to be pushed around. You'd be amazed how quickly a neighborhood heals when the bully finally loses her keys.